Let's look at this chemistry in a lot more detail. In response to several given mind states, which we will need to define in detail, the first of the mind states is stress. And by stress we mean individuals who need to deliver on a deadline. They fear not delivering on the deadline. And this fear is based on the fact that this might affect their standing, their tenure, their success. This is what we mean by stress. The second mind state is depression. Now, I personally don't understand depression very well. And when I've turned to my psychiatric colleagues and asked them what depression is, they've given me a long list of adjectives. And it starts somewhere with not happy with life, not eating well, not sleeping well, not having enough sex, not enjoying my sex when I get it, etc. And so one can't really get one's head around what they mean by depression. In this particular model, we would refer to it as levels of hopeless helplessness. And this can be a transient hopeless helplessness on one day, just not feeling like engaging the world, to a hopelessness that lasts maybe a week, maybe a month. Once hopeless helplessness extends beyond several months, we move into that bad space, that entrapment space, which has a very negative effect on our chemistry of wellness and performance. And then we have anxiety. Anxiety, very much a physiological phenomenon. We all know what it means to be anxious. And finally, hostility. Now, hostility used to also be brushed under the carpet as being relatively insignificant, but today we know, in fact, that hostility is probably one of the most negative of the emotions. One asks, in fact, what the difference is between pure aggression and hostility. Well, let me try and illustrate what the difference is between the two. Aggression, I am at point A, I am driven to get to point B, I have to get to point B. I have to get to point B to justify my existence. And along the way I encounter you, and I pick you up and I throw you out the way and I continue to be, nothing personal. That then is aggression. Hostility, on the other hand, is I am at point A, I am driven to get to point B, I have to get to point B, and along the way I encounter you. I pick you up and I say, who are you to get in my way? I inflict grievous bodily harm and chuck you out the way and then continue on to point B. And so we see the difference between aggression and hostility. Hostility incorporates aggression as well as this element to do grievous bodily harm. And we know, in fact, today that harboring hostility breeds the worst form of chemistry, as we will explain as we go along. Now, these mind states give rise to changes in neurochemistry, which have been identified and which we are going to look at in detail. We will look at three neurotransmitters: serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. And the configuration that results from those mind states, or is associated with those mind states, are a lowered level of serotonin, a lowered level of dopamine, and a raised level of noradrenaline. Now let's look at those individually. Serotonin, that's the stuff that your doctors have been telling you is associated with happiness. We in fact would say that serotonin really just makes you feel a little happier about your unhappiness. We do know, in fact, that low levels of serotonin are associated with anxiety. So all efforts at raising your serotonin levels probably would only diminish your anxiety. We know that studies done on the drugs that push up your serotonin, which are referred to as the SSRIs, probably are only slightly more effective than the placebo effect. The placebo effect is the effect of the sugar-coated pill, and we know that its effect is about 40%. And so at best, these SSRIs, based on studies, when you speak to the resident rather than the prof who's running the study, would be only about 10% more than the placebo effect. In our part of the world, there are so many people on these SSRIs pushing up their serotonin that, in fact, we might as well put it in our water supply. Dopamine is the important stuff. Dopamine is associated with motivation, concentration, feel good, and all the things that give us the edge in terms of our performance environment. We need to appreciate the fact that there is an inverse relationship between serotonin and dopamine, such that increasing levels of serotonin results in diminishing levels of dopamine, and it is dopamine that is the important stuff. So diminishing dopamine would result in diminished sense of achievement, gratification, and all the important functional aspects which give us the edge in terms of performance. Now let's look at noradrenaline. Noradrenaline levels go up in response to these mind states. Noradrenaline is great for climbing 10-foot walls, but not great for intellectual function. In fact, noradrenaline will affect your prefrontal cortex function, which will preclude you from being able to string words together, from doing calculations, all the important stuff that we find in our work environment. We, in fact, once did a study, and one of the aspects of the study was to measure noradrenaline levels in a certain corporate. And we found, to our absolute amazement, that their noradrenaline levels in this particular corporate in the middle of the day were the same levels as soldiers in front line of battle. And I turned to the individuals in this particular corporate and said, do you have lions and tigers chasing you down corridors? In fact, such is the level of noradrenaline in the working day of certain corporates that we now understand that this would have a major negative effect on their higher intellectual function. A great illustration of the effects of raised noradrenaline levels on intellectual function has been shown by a friend of mine who is a flight instructor. And what he does is he takes young students up into the clouds, he loses them in the clouds, and then when they are fully panic-stricken, telling them that they better get him out the clouds because they're both going to die, when they're really caught up in a serious anxiety situation, he pushes his watch in front of their face and says, can you tell me the time? And they look at their watch and they are totally unable to tell the time. This is the effects of very high levels of noradrenaline levels on higher function. Now, these three hormones, serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline, circulate into the circulation where they have a major effect on one of the cells of the immune system referred to as the macrophage. Now, usually the macrophage is the big cell. When a bug enters the body, it's the first there. It hits the bug for the first time and then secretes substances called the pro-inflammatory cytokines, amongst many other things, to bring other cells to come and fight the bug. In this particular situation, there is no bug. What we have here are chemicals from the brain which shouldn't in fact be there in those levels, which reflect the mind state and which have impacted on the macrophage to secrete these chemicals called pro-inflammatory cytokines. Now, the pro-inflammatory cytokines have major effects at high levels, and we will look at them in turn. The first effect is that of inflammation. By its very name, it promotes inflammation, and in this particular case, the pro-inflammatory cytokine gives rise to inappropriate inflammation where there is no bug. And so you may experience pain in your toe, your head, your back, your stomach, all inappropriate. The second thing that it gives rise to, and much more importantly, is it has now been shown to give rise to cancer formation. Several years ago, the first of the studies showed that raised levels of pro-inflammatory cytokine, and by the way, there are three of those. There's interleukin-1, interleukin-6, and tumor necrosing factor alpha. It is the interleukin-6 which has been shown to impact on the nucleus of dividing cells and gives rise to cancer. Normally, cells divide and the DNA replicates itself, and in certain cases, the splicing is abnormal. The order of the bases in the DNA is abnormal, and the resulting cells which divide thereafter are abnormal and may give rise to cancer formation. But normally, there is an enzyme in the nucleus which corrects this particular splicing problem and so corrects the subsequent cell division. Interleukin-6, which is one of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, impacts negatively on this enzyme and suppresses its activity, thus laying the individual open to the development of abnormal cells. And so, as I said earlier on, one of the cancers that has been shown to emanate from this particular problem is myeloma, which is a cancer of the bone marrow. And more recently, in fact, in 2012, a similar effect was shown in the development of cancer of the breast. So certain cancers of the breast have been shown to result from a similar effect of the suppression of this very important positive enzyme by raised levels of interleukin-6, one of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. The second negative effect of these raised levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines are on the heart.